Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so in the last video, we brought in what was essentially Excalibur, Alpha Flight, and Blue Marvel as new faces, right? Some fresh faces. And we did some things like we talked about Black Panther 2, that we would basically do Doom War in the sense that Black Panther would essentially be injured over the course of Dr. Doom invading Latveria, or at least setting up a coup d'etat and stealing all of its vibranium, and that he would pass the mantle of Black Panther to his sister Shuri, just like he did in the comics. These are the kind of things that we would cover here, right? And so in this video, we are going to bring back a few familiar faces, and we're also going to bring in some totally new faces, right? And so what we're going to do here is we're going to pick up with Ant-Man 3. Now, the important thing to understand is Ant-Man 3 is actually coming out relatively soon. Technically, it's part of Phase 5, so it's going to be out within the next, 2 to 3 years, I think. So it'll be out long before we get to this part in the movie lineup, but we're actually going to piggyback off of it. And the reason why is because we'd have to assume that in Ant-Man 3, Cassie Lang would have, in some form or fashion, a superhero-esque role in relation to her father. Now, it could also be one of these things where her dad's like, don't do superhero stuff, like literally half the universe got wiped out, like you don't, like no, you don't do superhero antics. You stay home and you study and you take your classes and that's it. That's all you do. That could very well be an approach that he takes. I think that's the most practical approach, because I think that for a lot of young people, they could find that relatable, that parents are kind of imposing rules and boundaries and different things like that. And I think it would go a long way to making the character of Cassie Lang very relatable in the eyes of a lot of teenagers and young people who would go to see these films. But the reason why I think that's even more important is the film that we follow up in terms of really, I guess, officially this first portion of the films that we're making. What we do here is we kick things off with Nova. And Nova is going to be, from my perspective, it's going to be Sam Alexander. I know a lot of old school fans really want to see Richard Rider, but as most people will tell you, anybody who's been reading Richard Rider for a long enough time will tell you, his character pretty much sucked until Annihilation. And that's really just the way it is, right? There was really nothing interesting about Richard Rider until Annihilation. Whereas Sam Alexander is young and vibrant and still relatively fresh. More so than that, I think his story fits in better with the events of Avengers Endgame because it makes things more personal. In the comics, Sam Alexander's father had basically gone missing, and the whole idea was for Sam Alexander to use his father's Nova technology in order to locate him, right, to find out what it was that had happened to him. What we do here is we basically say that Sam Alexander, or at least the Peter Quill, and we can kind of tie this into Guardians of the Galaxy, but we could say Peter Quill was not the first or only Earthling abducted from Earth, right? That Sam Alexander's father was actually part of the Nova Corps operating on Xandar, that he would come back every so often, or he had just left, and we never really found out why, right? That Sam Alexander thought he'd been abandoned or something along those lines, whatever that case is, that after the events of Avengers Infinity War, when Thanos had invaded Xandar and taken the Power Stone, that Sam Alexander's father was one of the people who died. And so as a result of that, his father's helmet basically travels back to Earth and then tells Sam Alexander, you are now your father's replacement in the Nova Corps, right? And so Sam Alexander literally has to fly by the seat of his pants and learn how to use his powers, right? Which is a pretty fun and a pretty cool adventure to follow up with. That's one of the cool things about this is people love the idea of origin stories, but they also love watching a character learn how to use their powers. It's one of the things we love the most about Iron Man, right? Tony Stark learning how to use his abilities and then flying himself into the ceiling, right? Like those were things that were really fun and really enjoyable. Those popular themes can continue on with the character of Sam Alexander. And so this is particularly important because what it does is it leads into our next movie, The Young Avengers. And the Young Avengers here, I think, would be a great way to sort of capitalize on the popularity of Sam Alexander, right? This idea of a young, vibrant superhero who's now being recruited into a team. More so than that, the Young Avengers kind of gives us this sort of staging ground, this kind of proving ground, right? Almost like the Initiative. Those of you guys who don't know what that is, the Initiative was basically what happened in Marvel Comics after the Civil War event was won by Iron Man and Reed Richards and all those guys. They basically had what was called a 50-state initiative, where there would be registered superheroes in all 50 states, and they would be designated for the purpose of protecting that state, unless the threat in that state was so big that it required more Avengers from other states to be called in. And so because of that, they basically ended up having this process where they would essentially go through and teach heroes how to become heroes. They would go through a whole training process, which in reality wasn't the worst thing ever, but like Captain America, freedom, all that kind of stuff. And so ultimately the whole process ended up going away. But that's more or less what you do here. You treat the Young Avengers as not really young people who are sanctioned by the Avengers, but you blend it with the comics in the sense that in the comic books, the Young Avengers were a group of teenage kids who basically took up the mantle of more or less being Avengers, being, teenage Avenger kids in the aftermath of Avengers Disassembled when the Avengers team was disbanded and the launch of New Avengers when the team was reformed. They were just kind of there in the middle, right? And they fought some pretty heavy hitters, right? They beat out like Kang the Conqueror, who's a pretty powerful time-traveling guy. There were some cool moments there, right? But they weren't officially sanctioned. And in fact, when the Avengers reformed, one of their first acts was to basically chastise the New Avengers or the Young Avengers and to say, you're too young for this, right? But they ended up keeping on, and they proved to be exceedingly popular among young readers in Marvel Comics. And it's a great way to segue and to really sort of tap in to a lot of the young viewers in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So the Young Avengers, I think, would be a great way to go, right? We kind of keep that legacy of the Avengers roster going, right? So the team would consist of Cassie Lang, Kate Bishop, Thomas and Billy, the children of Scarlet Witch, and then of course Sam Alexander as Nova, which is a pretty solid lineup for that team, I think, right? And so following that, what we do is we shift over to our next film, which is The Winter Guard. And this film, much like Alpha Flight, is going to have more or less a teaser for the X-Men. And this comes in the form of a guy none other than Peter Rasputin. You may also know him as Colossus. And the way this plays out is that in the comics, the Winter Guard was Russia's answer to the Avengers team, right? And the idea was that because it really took place during the Cold War and the United States had an Avengers team, Russia wanted to have one of their own, right? The superhero race, right? Like you had the nuclear arms race, you had the superhero race going on as well, right? And so with that being the case, unlike the Avengers team in the United States, that was a volunteer-based team so long as they accepted you into their ranks and was financed by Tony Stark, what you had with the Winter Guard is the Russian government traveled around their country and then conscripted people into the Winter Guard, right? Like if they got a hold of you, you had to join. Like there was no way to get out of it. I mean, I guess you could escape Russia, right? But there was no way you couldn't say no, right? Like that wasn't really an option. And so what had happened is that through a combination of Giant Size X-Men #1 by Lynn Wein and Chris Claremont, the Colossus origin story, the one shot, we ended up learning that Colossus was supposed to be conscripted into the Winter Guard, but Charles Xavier arrived there just in the nick of time to basically save Colossus, and then in turn was recruited into his X-Men team in order to rescue the original X-Men team. You do something similar to that. What you basically say here is that you don't really have a great big huge moment. You have the Winter Guard doing the Winter Guard thing, whatever it is, but in the early recruiting phases, somebody walks into a room, they talk to somebody else, or you overhear a couple of guys smoking cigarettes, drinking coffee, and it's kind of like, okay, do we have any news about that Rasputin guy, because he seemed like a really good asset for the Winter Guard? And the response is no, like some bald guy came out of nowhere and just whisked him away. We have no idea what's going on, but it's just a reference, right, to Colossus being rescued by Charles Xavier of the X-Men and being brought to the United States to fight on the X-Men team, right? So it's a small little Easter egg, a small little moment, but a great way to kind of continue that foundation like we did with Alpha Flight and Wolverine. It's a great way to build that foundation and to slowly introduce the X-Men into the MCU. And so what we do here with our final film in this video and with this section of the whole thing, we bring back the people who were left over from the original Avengers team and then combine them with the Young Avengers. And then we call this team the New Avengers, right? So that's really how we kind of end this, right? Now this roster would consist of Sam Wilson, Captain America, Lila Barton in place of Kate Bishop, right? Because we can largely assume that Lila Barton is going to be the one who's going to be the new Hawkeye as opposed to Kate Bishop. We also have Spider-Man, we have Black Panther, we have Nova, we have Blue Marvel, and we have Cassie Lang. It's a great way to kind of combine these new faces along with these older faces and continue this tradition. I feel like if we launched the New Avengers and it was just a wholly new face, a wholly new team with no ties to the original team, I feel like people might reject that, because I feel like people would look at that and they would see that as too far removed from the original Avengers team. People would be like, no, we want to see some of these familiar faces, right? Like even if you're working them out, we want to see that this somehow ties into the last 10 years, and to be able to say that like Sam Wilson and these guys bring a lot of experience to the table that other people just don't have, right? That Sam Wilson and Spider-Man and Black Panther can say, okay, look, we were there during the whole like invasion of Earth by Thanos and all that kind of stuff. Like we were fighting there, we saw these events unfold, all that kind of stuff. We bring a kind of experience to the table that you just can't buy, and they can pass that on to the new generation. Now, one person that I do want to point your attention to here is Black Panther. Truthfully speaking, Black Panther would normally be the king of Wakanda, but in the last video that we did, we basically said that Black Panther 2 would be Doom War. And what that would do is it would basically have Dr. Doom invade Wakanda, or at least set up a coup d'etat in Wakanda that would lead to Black Panther being ousted, and then during the process, he would be injured, meaning he would pass the mantle to his sister Shuri, and Black Panther himself would be left powerless. The funny thing is we can't leave that for long, and Marvel Comics didn't either, right? Shortly after the events of Doom War, Jonathan Hickman took over Fantastic Four, and one of the first things he did is he had, or not really even the first thing he did, I think it might have been towards the end, but he ended up having Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four meeting with Black Panther, and they both went down to the City of the Dead, and they spoke with Bast, the Panther God. And T'Challa basically said, I'm not Black Panther anymore, you've given that power to my sister, she should be the one to maintain that power, but I need some kind of new ability, I need some new role. And so Bast made Black Panther the King of the Dead, which allowed allowed him to communicate with his ancestors and even control the dead at any point in time. Now, the only time we really saw him control the dead was during Secret Wars 2015 when he controlled the Marvel zombies, but it allows him to basically maintain his power set as we traditionally see him as Black Panther. Super strength, super speed, enhanced agility, different things like that, which means he can go on and still become a pretty formidable member and for the most part, maintain his same role within the Avengers team. Now, this combined with the intelligence that he has, as well as the super high intelligence of Blue Marvel, more than makes up for the lack of Iron Man. Of course, Cassie Lang also brings in technology in terms of her use of PIM technology, which by this point in the movie landscape will have been sanctioned by Scott Lang. He basically would have come to accept it and then become okay with it. But these are some cool things. I think this is a pretty solid lineup in terms of a new Avengers team. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoy this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.